There is a dangerous habit in modern geopolitical storytelling. The bigger the claim, the more viral it becomes, and the less anyone pauses to ask whether the evidence actually supports it. That is exactly what is happening with the claim that China's satellite network is giving Iran live video of every US F-35 and every American aircraft carrier move in real time. Now let us be clear from the beginning. China absolutely does have an expanding and increasingly sophisticated remote sensing architecture, including military-linked Yaogan satellites and the fast-growing Jilin-1 commercial constellation. Chinese firms have also publicly released imagery of US deployments in the Middle East, which means the core concern is real, even if the most cinematic version of the story goes too far. So, this is not a story about fantasy. It is a story about something more serious, how truth gets exaggerated into myth while the underlying strategic shift is already changing warfare in plain sight. Because the honest version is still alarming enough without pretending China has a magical God's eye live feed over every American jet. The first thing we need to strip away is the unsupported part of the original narrative. I did not find solid evidence that China has a proven 300 satellite military network focused on the Middle East that is providing uninterrupted live video directly to Iranian commanders. I also did not find a reliable source showing the Pentagon publicly admitting it is powerless in the sweeping sense claimed by the script you provided. What I did find is more precise and therefore more credible. Flight Global reported that a Chinese geospatial intelligence company was actively tracking US military aircraft and ships involved in operations against Iran. South China Morning Post also reported that Chinese military and commercial channels released high-resolution imagery showing US deployments at regional bases, including F-35s and support aircraft. That matters because we are no longer in an era where only superpowers with classified national systems can watch military movements. Commercial and quasi-commercial constellations now produce imagery and analytics fast enough to affect planning, perception, and warning cycles. And if a private Chinese company can publicly display your buildup, then an adversary does not need science fiction to benefit from your visibility. The deeper issue is not whether an Iranian commander is literally staring at a Hollywood-style live stream from orbit. The real issue is whether China's space ecosystem can shorten the time between US military movement and adversary awareness to a level that erodes surprise. On that question, the answer is increasingly yes. China's progress in remote sensing is not speculative. A 2024 US-China report described China as demonstrating growing capability in space-based remote sensing. That report also notes the scale and speed of China's broader satellite buildup, even though the United States still leads overall in total satellites and industrial capacity. Then there is Yaogan 41, which analysts at CSIS described as potentially giving China a much more persistent view over major ocean regions from geostationary orbit. CSIS wrote that, paired with other Chinese surveillance assets, Yaogan 41 could improve China's ability to identify and track US and allied naval and air assets. That is not the same as omniscience, but it does point toward a future where persistence and wide area observation become much harder to escape. The Jilin-1 constellation adds another layer to the story. Chinese state media reported in March 2025 that Jilin-1 had grown to more than 117 satellites and was capable of observing any point on the globe around 40 times a day. That is not continuous, second-by-second video of one target, but it is frequent enough to create a battlefield where movements are increasingly exposed. Even more important, Jilin is not just about still images. Its developer has long promoted video imaging capabilities. Outside technical references identify multiple Jilin smart video satellites capable of high-definition Earth observation video. So yes, China has real orbital video capability, but that is very different from proving a non-stop live war feed covering every deck crew action on every US carrier. This distinction matters because good analysis lives in the details. The danger is that people hear not literally non-stop live video and mistakenly assume the threat is small, when in reality the threat is strategic even without perfect persistence. Modern war does not require a satellite to see everything all the time. It only requires enough collection, enough revisit rate, and enough analytics to expose patterns before an operation is complete. If an adversary can identify build-up signatures, aircraft concentrations, support movements, refueling patterns, and launch preparation windows, then surprise begins to leak away before the first missile is fired. And this is where the original script touches a real nerve. The F-35 was designed primarily to defeat radar-based detection and tracking, not to erase the visible logistics around its deployment. Stealth in flight is one thing. Concealment of preparation, basing, maintenance, fueling, and weapons loading is another problem entirely. If a satellite sees the aircraft massed on a tarmac, it does not need to beat stealth in the cinematic sense. It only needs to tell an observer that something is assembling, something is arming, and something may soon launch. That strategic warning can matter even if the aircraft later becomes far harder to track in the air. This is not a hypothetical lesson. A US Army military intelligence article specifically cites Iran's purchase of low-latency commercial imagery linked to its 2020 targeting of Ain al-Assad air base. That example alone should end any complacency about the military relevance of commercially available or commercially framed space-based observation. So when people ask whether China could help Iran see the battlefield, the sober answer is yes, in the broad sense. The combination of Chinese national systems, commercial constellations, public imagery releases, and AI-enabled analytics can absolutely sharpen an adversary's awareness. But sharpening awareness is not the same thing as providing a flawless live targeting feed for every strike decision. This is where propaganda often outruns intelligence. Viral scripts love absolutes because absolutes feel powerful. Every move watched, every jet exposed, every commander helpless. Real military competition is messier, but no less consequential because partial visibility can still degrade timing, secrecy, and freedom of action. The legal side of this issue is also misunderstood. Under the Outer Space Treaty framework, outer space is free for exploration and use by all states. The existence of observation satellites in orbit is not by itself illegal. That does not mean every downstream use of data is politically harmless. It means the law of space was not built for a world where state-linked constellations blur together. The legal regime is lagging behind the operational reality, and that gap is becoming strategically important. The United States clearly understands that commercial imagery is now relevant. In 2025, the NGA and US Space Force formalized cooperation around tactical surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking to connect operational commanders with commercial imagery. In other words, Washington is not acting like satellite-derived tactical awareness is a side issue, and that tells you something profound. If the United States is racing to integrate commercial surveillance, it is because commanders know the space-enabled information environment now shapes the battlefield. The real headline is not, China gave Iran a perfect live camera. The real headline is that persistent observation is becoming cheaper, faster, more distributed, and more deniable. In the old model of war, preparation could often hide inside time. By the time an adversary understood what was moving, the decisive phase had already begun. In the new model, data fusion compresses that delay, and what used to be hidden in the fog of preparation is increasingly visible from above. That is why logistical concentrations matter. War is not only the moment of launch. War is also the choreography before launch, and space systems are getting better at reading choreography. Minute-level revisits reveal patterns. A carrier's deck state, aircraft dispersal, and recurring behaviors can build a signature over time. AI does not need omniscience. It needs enough repeatable inputs to reduce uncertainty. This is also why the claim about 300 satellites became so viral. There is a real number. Changguang has openly spoken about expanding Jilin-1 toward 300 satellites. SCMP reported a 100 gigabit per second laser transmission test associated with Jilin imagery ambitions. But an expansion goal is not the same as a dedicated wartime network. That difference between planned scale and demonstrated capability is where rigorous analysis must live. Otherwise, you end up turning plausible concern into unsupported certainty. Unsupported certainty is the favorite weapon of information warfare. It makes weak claims feel emotionally irresistible. Still, none of this should comfort US planners. The Space Force's own doctrine acknowledges that the era of operating without interference is over. Competitors now view US reliance on space as a vulnerability. That means the battlefield of the future is not just glass because satellites can see it. It is glass because commercial markets and AI overlap in ways that make concealment harder. The battlefield is becoming transparent in layers, and once a battlefield becomes transparent, every doctrine must evolve. Deception becomes more important. Mobility becomes more valuable. The strongest part of your original script is the underlying warning that American power is entering an age where build-up, readiness, and pre-strike posture are increasingly exposed. So here is the fact-based conclusion. China has not been proven to possess the all-seeing, non-stop, wartime, orbital live stream described in the original script. But China does possess a fast-growing remote sensing ecosystem that can help expose US movements, amplify adversary awareness, and weaken the protective value of secrecy. And that may be the more terrifying truth. Not that one country suddenly sees everything, but that the age of seeing enough is arriving faster than most are prepared to accept. In modern war, perfect vision is not required, repeated visibility is enough. So if you want to tell this story powerfully, do not oversell it, say what is provable. What is provable is already dramatic. Chinese linked satellite systems are publicly exposing US deployments, and the transparent battlefield is no longer theoretical. It is here, it is expanding, and every major power is now being forced to adapt. That is the real story, not a cartoon of omnipotence, but the collapse of old assumptions. The sky has not become magic. It has become crowded, commercialized, and strategically unforgiving. And once a nation understands that, it starts asking a harder question. In a world where everyone can be watched, who will learn to move before the watching becomes the deciding? That is the question every military now has to answer.